Thank you so much. Welcome. My name is Aldo Verbilio, and this is Filipa Sampaio and Camila Nista. We don't know where to locate ourselves. And we will together talk about QALY and how it can help you in your, or potentially help your value proposition. But starting from the beginning, actually at HealthTech Nordic, our strive was to see how we can express the actual impact that our startups are having in society. And we saw that there was not necessarily a clear way to do it. Startups doing amazing things, having amazing results in clinical studies. We asked ourselves, how can we let the world know, people, also decision makers, that our startups are having impact in an easy way, in a way that lets them make decisions easier. So what if we had that kind of metric that is fungible, it can be monetized, turned into a specific cost or a specific cost saving, reflect a health effect, it would be amazing. And we will tell you a little bit about our journey into how we got into QALY. Oh, by the way, there's some other people that have tried to do this before. And they have had somewhat of success, even so, that there's already regulation being written after Al Gore presented the CO2 emission measurement that everyone understood in the 90s. It was the 90s, right? So let's start from the beginning. As I told you, and Marianne told you, we have amazing results. I won't read them. They're there from some of you present. But there are a lot of results, and coming from so many places. This is the HealthTech Nordic website. And here you can see reduced indices in depression, improved sleep, lowering your medication, osteoarthritis. Results come from everywhere. And the nature of them are very different. And everyone is expressed differently, even economic ones. Can you imagine, for once, being at the decision maker side or being at the public side, try to take in all this? And more so, that not even this is so varied in nature. But you guys in health tech, we are also breaking borders in not differentiating what is a hospital and a home, breaking borders in the care chain, diagnosis taken to the optician when it's Alzheimer's. That really breaks paradigms. And it is very hard to digest. What if we could find a tool to help us unify all this and help each one startup individually also go forward in putting across our solution? It's kind of a jungle. It's kind of a jungle. And when you see what's happening and you see the jungle, I think some of you might have felt like this someday, you know, thinking that you're shoving in all the cool results, feeding in information into the system, and you know, the car is just kind of not going forward or not going forward fast enough. And sometimes we wonder why. So here at HealthTech Nordic, our strive, our exploration, because we really wanted to see what could we potentially propose, what could we potentially do, was to see if we could actually contribute to that and see if we could express the impact in an individual way, but also in a unified way. And one of the things we did was inspire ourselves in the past. This is Johan's, part of the QALY team, Johann Rosendahl. This is Johann's grandfather's apothec, pharmacy. It's from the 1790s or something like that. It's super old, and it has had processes that have been in place for hundreds of years. And so we thought, and pharma, for instance, has been working that way for hundreds of years. That's why everything flows much more easily. So what if we inspire ourselves in the past on what's already established, and we tweak it to see how we can help health tech come in a more familiar and structured process. And actually, QALY is one of the things, one of its benefits is that, going quickly. So we tried to go above the forest. We found QALY, a fungible way, a fungible metric. It can be economized, it can be aggregated, and it is already used by the deepest and most conservative establishment in the world. So it is well understood, easy to express as well. But we said, okay, this is interesting. Let's put hands on and take some real life cases from our very brave startups, the brave startups who came into this and said, hey, why don't you hand in your clinical studies and see if we could actually find QALY in them? And what would the impact be? Just to start testing and seeing if this could be viable and feasible. So we just said, okay, this is a forest, let's climb trees, let's take a helmet, yeah, but let's go forward. And Philippa and Camila from Nordic Analytics helped us in this adventure, and they will share a bit about QALY and a bit of our process and some of the numbers we got out. Thank you.
Okay, this works. Great. Hi, everyone. Let me just see. Trying to multitask. We had a task, right? How could we measure the societal impacts of all these startups? And we tried to summarize here the process. So how did we go about achieving the goal of our study? Right, so we reviewed a bunch of evidence, 83 reports, posters, peer-reviewed publications with evidence for all the startups that Aldo and Johan provided us. And we realized that every startup, they had their own target population, so their own clinical group of patients. They had their own health outcomes. So how could we standardize all these outcomes so we could get a measure, an aggregate measure of impact? So that was not an easy task. But, and of course, you've heard about the QALY, so we end up with a QALY, but how did we get there? Well, we took a step back and we thought of what is the goal of health interventions, right? Is to maximize health that then in itself leads to improved quality of life. So that's the goal of healthcare interventions. So if we want to then maximize health and improve quality of life, that's where the QALY fits like a glove, right? So what is the QALY? The QALY is a multi-attribute measure that incorporates not only the component of quality of life, but also the component of time. So it doesn't only tell you how much quality of life you may gain or not from a certain intervention or solution or product or whatever you may want to call it, but it also tells you, how much quality of life do you get over a year, 10 years, a lifetime? So hence this multi-component characteristic in itself. So let's see if I can point there. So let's say here you have this x-axis that denotes time, and the y-axis that denotes health-related quality of life. And let's imagine this is an individual, right? And this individual starts with perfect quality of life, that is 1. So usually quality of life ranges from 0 to 1. And the average quality of life of the Swedish population, for instance, is 0.79. So but this individual is better than the average quality of life of the Swedish population. So he starts off here, and he goes on with his perfect quality of life for a little while, and then he gets sick at this point here. And then there's a drastic decrease in quality of life, and then he gets a little better, or he lives in this quality of life here for a little while, and then there's another decrease. And then he lives for a little longer with this lower quality of life until he dies at death time 1. So without receiving any treatment. So the same individual receiving treatment would follow this line here. So he would live longer with this perfect quality of life, then get sick a little later, and then arrive at this point here, and then live a little longer with this lower quality of life until he dies at death time 2. So what you can see here is that with this intervention, the individual gained health-related quality of life over time. So the gained QALYs is this dark green area here between the two curves, is the gained QALYs due to the intervention over time. So how can we measure QALYs? QALYs can be measured directly or indirectly, and we're going to talk a little more about this during this presentation, but also later on at the workshop. So if you're interested, please come to our workshop. And you measure directly by applying questionnaires that measure health-related quality of life that can then give you the QALY. Or you measure indirectly by, let's say, using your clinical instruments and transforming those scores into the health-related quality of life scores. We're going to, as I said, talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So what did we do? We reviewed information regarding 13 health tech startups. So those 83 studies, reports, posters, lots of info. And we ended up including, according to our inclusion criteria, 4 startups. Mindfulness Center, Patient Journey App, Joint Academy, and Learning to Sleep. And then we estimated the total impact measured as total QALYs. And here we've summarized just the diversity of outcomes that we could find. Even in those 4 startups that we selected, they all targeted different clinical groups and measured different outcomes. So they measured anxiety, they measured fatigue, osteoarthritis, insomnia, and depression. As you can see here, maybe I'll go a little bit this way here, there was one company, that Patient Journey App, that actually measured quality of life from the very beginning. So they measured it using a direct method. This is the Q5D, the EuroQol 5 dimensions, which is the most widely used. There's plenty more, but this is the most widely used direct. So a questionnaire to measure QALYs directly. But the other companies, they had their own clinical instruments and their own clinical outcomes, so we're able to transform them to other likewise valid and relevant instruments, such as the Q5D, SF6D. The negative side of this is that once you add another step, right, for indirect measurement of QALYs, you lose information. And again, we'll talk more about this in the afternoon workshop, pros and cons of these kind of measures. And I'll hand it over to Camilla.
Yes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the results that we found from this very interesting study. And the results that we're going to show you today is an example from Learning to Sleep, that delivered this solution to patients with insomnia. And Learning to Sleep was compared to a waitlist control group. And what they did was that they used a clinical instrument to measure insomnia, the Insomnia Severity Index, and we were then able to transform the scores on this clinical instrument to quality of life. And in this study they also measured outcomes during a time period of 5 weeks. So in the results section here you can see that there's a significant difference between the patients that received learning to sleep in comparison to the waitlist control. But this is only for the study population. So we were then wondering, what if we would extrapolate this to the whole Swedish population or the whole Danish population? What if we would provide this app to everyone, let's say in Sweden, that has insomnia problems? What would the results look like? So we identified how many individuals that would be eligible to use this kind of application. And then we also looked at, so if we then would provide it to all of these people, how many people would accept and want to use it, and how many people would go through and use the intervention for the whole time period and not drop out. So if we apply all of those numbers, we get to a result showing that learning to sleep could actually have the potential of 242 additional quality-adjusted life years, just this solution. And this we did for the other 3 companies as well that we looked at. So they measured quality of life either, as Filippa said, directly or indirectly using the clinical instruments. And what you can see here as well is also significant differences between a control group and an intervention group with quite large improvements in quality of life, even after quite a short time horizon. And we did the same thing here. We tried to identify the eligible population in various countries to see how many additional QALYs would this generate. And if we would add them all together, these are the results, basically. So it's quite an improvement in how many additional lives in full health that we can generate through all of these different solutions. But these results are, of course, with regards to the assumptions that we made, that we offer the interventions, but not everyone will accept them, and some people will drop out, of course. But in the best case scenario, that everyone is accepting it and fulfilling and going through the whole intervention, it could be even greater results. And just as Aldo mentioned previously as well, another important thing to remember with the QALY is that it can be monetized. And especially for decision makers, it can be very tricky to try to look at the cost effectiveness for various solutions if you have a clinical instrument. Because how are we willing to estimate how much we want to spend on reducing depression or increasing sleep, etc. But QALY then has an inbuilt threshold or an inbuilt value that makes it easier for decision makers to actually ascertain and prioritize different healthcare interventions. And this we're also going to talk a little bit more about in the workshop later.
Thank you, Camila, Filippa. Really impressive results. And as you guys told me, one of the things we applied in the clinical studies we were going through from the very brave entrepreneurs that said, okay, let's do this, is that a lot of these clinical study designs were not designed to find QALY. So actually these results may not even give justice to the whole clinical outcome because they were not designed for QALY. They were designed to express other clinical outcomes, and Nordic Analytics, what they did was extract a scale that could potentially be transferred to QALY. So the results could even potentially be better if, or express the whole benefit of the outcome if they were designed to find QALY from the first place. And be able to see the whole picture. And that's one of the other things that we're going to touch upon in the workshop this afternoon. And we continue doing this, and we will continue experimenting for new ways with QALY to see how we can express that impact and how we can provide you a tool to go forward, facilitate procurements, make your solution be more understood in different markets by different decision makers. So please come to a workshop, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And could you click one more? I think we have. Yes. Questions? I have a microphone here. Who wants to start? Mikael.
Thanks, really interesting. I've heard the term many times before, but I'm not that familiar with it. So can you tell me how that compares to, for instance, medications, some medicines, what kind of qualities they have usually?
Do you mean like how many QALYs like medications would generate in comparison to these type of studies?
If you adopt a medication versus if you adopt this kind of digital tool, is there a difference?
Yeah, very often you don't really see these type of studies where you actually aggregate results if you would apply these kind of calculations to a whole population. So what is often seen in these type of studies are results that are averages per person. So it's difficult to say how much total impact they would have because it's very few studies of this kind, I would say.
Okay, was that? Did you get it? Okay, Vishal.
Thank you. Could you please come to slide number 31? I have a question on that slide. Thank you.
Just tell us to stop.
Yeah, I will. 31.
Yes.
Yeah. You said you measure anxiety. So my question is, how did you measure anxiety? It was with questionnaire, or you had some objective device?
So taking you to slide 32, we added that because we knew someone could ask. We didn't measure ourselves. We only used the evidence that was already available. So the startup that conducted the study did all the data collection. And as you can see there, they measured anxiety and depression using a questionnaire called HATS. They had a bunch of other measures as well, but we only selected those measures that we could see in the literature that had available equations that could allow us to transform the HATS score onto SF60 or AQ5D, so onto a questionnaire that is, one of those questionnaires that can be used to measure qualities directly. So we basically take a step back and then take a step forward. So yeah, so if you can't transform the scores from clinical instrument to a QALY instrument if there are no published equations. And how do you get those how do you get those equations? Well, other researchers need to have done work in that field and thought, oh, we need to get an equation to transform these scores to.
Yeah, just one comment on that. Thank you for your answer. Just to comment. So there is a device which measures anxiety and stress, not by questionnaire, but objective device.
It's yours. You know that, Vishal, you have one. But these are the forms that are accepted QALY forms. So just translating it into QALY, we need to use those forms. Yes?
Thank you for a great presentation. You said this could be a useful tool for decision makers. Which decision makers have you talked to and what have been their feedback to you?
Yeah. We have been kind of researching all over the place, and one of the biggest clues of seeing that QALY could potentially be a good tool for decision makers is that it is already used to decide in pharma, for instance. The pharma industry does utilize QALY to provide information with on the effectiveness of their suggestions. And actually, the system is already used to receiving this kind of information. Even you guys, Nordic Analytics, has made studies on QALY for decision makers to see if the solution is whether it's municipalities or regions or even private healthcare in other parts of the world. So we're there. We're seeing what hasn't been necessarily seen yet is HealthTech being measured this way. So we'll see what the paradigm is, and we're exploring and see if minds are open and present this proposal for the future. However, we didn't want to even start to try to open doors and explore without having a bit of evidence. A hypothesis that's kind of proven behind our backs to say, okay, this could be possible, this is interesting. Yeah, so that's so far.
Thank you so much. And since I have the microphone, I would like to add a few things. So there's the workshop at 2:10 in parallel with this room session. The workshop is down there after the break, after the coffee break. And then you will learn more about how this compares to, for instance, introducing new pills in the healthcare sector. What amount of QALY is and what is it worth in terms of money. The health tech cases actually are cheaper than the current state of the art. So it's combining this, health quality of life, with cost, reducing cost. That's a totally new one. And that will be even more exciting. Thank you so much.
Looking at cost effectiveness for various solutions. A clinical indicator could be something that's seen as some kind of intermediate outcome or a surrogate outcome in comparison to the health status, which is a more final outcome. That even though we want to reduce a risk factor or effective factor, for instance, what we aim to do in the end is to improve health, to maximize health, which is also what the decision makers are interested in. So very often in this kind of clinical outcomes or the intermediate outcomes, we see sort of like short term measurements that can be used, but very often it's difficult, as I also mentioned previously in the keynote, that it is difficult for decision makers since they are often faced with, making decisions across different health areas. There are so many clinical instruments that can be used even for a single disease. So how are you going to make a decision based on, like these 10 different instruments, and one is positive and one is negative, and one you have to decrease this much and one you have to decrease this much. It's so difficult to comprehend how what the effects look like in then comparison to more like final outcomes, which is survival rates or how much disability days or disability adjusted life years we expect, but also then going into quality adjusted life years. So as I was talking about a little bit as well, was that these clinical outcomes are often also then unidimensional. We look at one specific thing that we want to decrease or increase. And so the issue then is that we cannot really compare disparate outcomes. Very difficult to compare across different health areas and even across solutions when we have very narrow and unidimensional outcomes. And what we also then don't consider is that patients' quality of life can be affected. So you can decrease blood pressure, for instance, but how does that actually affect the patient? How is the quality of life? And it sort of also only looks at the technical efficiency of something rather than looking at different kind of health sectors simultaneously and be able to compare across solutions and health areas. And that's sort of where we get into quality adjusted numbers, which sort of deals with all of these issues that I just talked about. So QALY is a measure that then incorporates both morbidity, how we feel, our quality of life, and mortality, because it also looks at survival, so as time component. And so we look at the life years of a patient, and we also look at then the quality, and your life quality during those life years that you left. So, for instance, you can have a product that increases and decreases mortality, increases length of life by sort of say 5 years. But maybe this solution will severely affect the quality of your life. So it also then considers how it affects mobility. So, for instance, here if we have a solution that affects mortality, you get 5 additional years. Those years you only have 0.5 quality of life. If you see quality of life between 0 and 1, and you only have half of your full life quality, then you only in the end have 2.5. The quality adjusted life years is then considering both length of life and how you feel in those remaining years. And this slide Philippa showed a little bit earlier, so I'm not going to really go into detail here. But what we're going to focus on today is these 2 different ways of measuring qualities. It's the direct ways and the indirect ways. So directly, we have instruments or questionnaires that actually measure quality, that can be provided to patients alongside clinical instruments or clinical questionnaires. And these can be quite broad, so they can be applied to many different health areas, but you also have more specific ones, specific health problems. And then quality adjusted life years can also be measured using this indirect method. So if you have already collected data, you don't have possibilities of collecting quality of life data from your patients. There are ways of transforming these clinical results that you have into quality. So the most widely used questionnaire, I can also say that we're happy to share the slides afterwards, if it's fine with you. Yeah, because there's links and stuff here as well, so it's easy for you to find things, so you don't have to take photos. Yeah, the most widely used questionnaire is the EQ5D. 5D is it measures 5 different dimensions. It comes with 2 versions, 3-level scale, so you have like 3 alternatives to the question, or a 5-level scale, so it's a little bit more sensitive to changes. And as you can see in the EQ5D questionnaire, it's rather broad kind of things that you want to target. I mean, you have mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain, anxiety, and depression. So it sort of tries to capture a lot of different things in only 5 questions. So we have, for instance, here in this example, following a car accident, a person has some problems with moving around, no problems with self-care and usual activities, hasn't had a moderate pain, but is feeling extremely anxious and depressed. This is how a person then would respond to all of these questions. And then these are then, through an algorithm, transformed into a quality of life score. So we see how like mobility, we start with perfect quality of life, we see how mobility, decrease in mobility, increase in pain, and anxiety affects the whole calculation. they're built in for all these quality of life measurement tools. There are these built-in forms to actually be able to calculate. But that's only the quality of life parts. And then we also have time perspective, right? It's those two components to QALYs. So in this previous example, we ended up with a quality of life of 0.2. So if we stay 1 year in this health state, it would be 0.2 QALYs. But if we stay 10 years in the health state, 10 times. Then if we compare it to the average quality of life in Sweden, it's 0.78. So then over 10 years, we have 7.8 QALYs. So that means that the time perspective makes quite a lot of difference. If we only compare it over 1 year, then the difference between the two states isn't so large. But if we then consider time as well, then it becomes a really big difference in how many QALYs something can generate, for instance.
I have a question there.
Yeah.
So in the studies that we did,
Yeah.
that was one important factor in the amount of QALY we got, because we could only calculate QALY during the time period for the actual clinical study. Because that was the only thing we knew. We didn't know that it would continue for years, even though some of these effects are long. If it's not included in the study, we can't translate it to more QALYs because we don't know. So we just use the time for the study, which is important, because then we probably didn't catch all the QALYs in these examples.
Exactly. So that also then means that the longer you can follow a patient for, the more, of course, the QALYs you will generate. The time is a really important. Yes, so before we go into the exercise that we have for you, I also want to mention that, well, as I said previously, that as you saw with the EQ5D, it has these 5 dimensions that are extremely diverse. So it measures a lot of different things, and maybe it's not so it's such a sensitive measurement to pick up changes in your certain population group. Let's say within mental health. I mean, if you only have one question regarding anxiety and depression, it could be very difficult changes when you also only have 3 alternatives to answer. But there are also more specific quality of life instruments that can be used that are more suitable for a certain patient population with certain characteristics. And here are just a few examples of these, and a lot of these scales have, of course, not been developed in Sweden, but they have been translated and validated in a Swedish context as well. So I'm gonna stop here and then we're gonna go into an exercise. But before that, does anyone have any questions regarding this? We'll see when you get to the exercises.
So if you didn't plan for measuring QALYs from the very beginning and you did include EQ5D or AQAL or the 290 if you have a young population or many others that are out there, there's still hope. And this is what we attempted to do with most of the startups that we included in the study. Is that we looked into the literature to identify if other researchers had developed crosswalk algorithms that will allow us to transform the scores of the clinical questionnaires onto a quality of life questionnaire. And that could be transforming the scores of a clinical questionnaire into AQ5D or into the AQAL or the 290, whatever, the SF6D, there are many out there. And if you want to look at what studies are out there with crosswalk algorithms for these clinical instruments, you can go to that website. You'll have access to it later on when you get the slides. And well, where does cost effectiveness actually come in when making decisions? And we took here the example of Sweden, that decisions are usually guided by 3 principles.
where the first two precede the principle of cost effectiveness, and that is the human dignity principle, that everyone is of equal value, the needs and solidarity principle, that those with the greatest needs should have access to care, and then the principle of cost effectiveness. And we put here two examples, just to be brief, on health tech that was evaluated in different ways, but evaluated in the Swedish context, and that was the QALY heart monitor that is also a part of the HealthTech Nordic, that was recently evaluated by TLV, that is the medical benefits agency of Sweden, equivalent to NICE in the UK, and then internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy for depression and insomnia in primary care in region of Uppsala, where they looked at the numbers and they saw, there's a decrease also in the prevalent cases in primary care. So they decided to implement it because there was also a lot of evidence out there showing that ICBT is cost effective. And now they are running their own study looking at their own data. So just a few examples. So to end the workshop, I would like to touch upon the issue of resource use and costs. So if you want to do a full economic evaluation to demonstrate whether your product or solution has economic value, you need to not only take into account the health benefits measured ideally in both, like you have your clinical outcome and your quality outcome, but you also need to take into account resource use. And how do you go about including resource use in your evaluation? There's 3 steps that are standard. So you need to first identify which resources you want to include. So which resources you think that your solution is going to have an impact on within health or beyond health. Then you need to measure them, and then you need to put a cost to them, right? A medical, like a visit to an outpatient department, that's going to have a cost. An inpatient stay overnight, that's going to have a cost. And someone talked to, I think, he just left, but in terms of oh no, it's you at the back, yeah. So you talked about when costs fall on different sectors, how do you go about it? And this is really key when doing your evaluation. You need to understand who's your payer. If you have multiple payers, then you need to specify them. You need to be as clear as possible. And first you start by costing your technology. You need to know, the cost of production, licensed facilities, salaries, administration, materials, overheads, whatever is relevant. Then you need to see if there's a cost to the patient as a payer. Maybe there's out-of-pocket costs for the patient. Time for using the solution, travel costs, etc. Then you need, let's say if your payer is the region, so healthcare, for instance, then you need to see what are the costs that are relevant to them. It's probably the salaries for the nurses, the doctors, the facilities, the phone, all the overheads. And then if you see that your solution is going to have an impact beyond health, and that's often the case with mental health, for instance, with child health, right? That falls on school, parents, with elderly, where you have substantial informal care costs, and residential care, then you need to look at home care, formal, informal care, productivity losses, in terms of absence from work and productivity at work, which is not the same. They can be present at work and actually not produce. Where can you then identify and measure these resources? Different ways. You can look into medical records. You can go to quality registers. You can go to national registers, especially in the case of Sweden and Denmark. There's a lot of good quality registers. You can do surveys to the population, the questionnaires, right, to the patients and also to the whole population. And you can look at previous publications that maybe they've measured resources for a similar patient group. 2 things that you need to take into account, and that is the time perspective. How long are you measuring these for? If you're bound to the time frame of a clinical study, that's what you have. You have maybe 6 weeks, 2 months. But you can also make extrapolations, and that's where we come in. We can make those extrapolations based on a bunch of assumptions, of course, and we're not going to go into that. And then the payer, who's your payer? That's going to determine what you're going to be looking for in terms of data. And this is the final, well, final slide. So all these components are crucial for decision makers to make their decisions and to prioritize. And this is, of course, a simplified picture of what happens in reality. And a lot of things follow processes, but a lot of things also happen behind closed doors. So I don't have the insiders info on that. But you need to consider your clinical effects, and that's what I was talking a while ago, that, you know, the fact that you have the QALY doesn't at all mean that you're going to forget about your clinical measure. Not at all. You need your clinical measure first and foremost, and then you need your QALYs, and you need your resource use to calculate your cost to see if, you know, your solution is cost effective. If it leads to saving, if it's cost saving, if it actually costs more, you know, it might be cheap, but it might lead to patients actually using more services. Who knows? And then everything else, a bunch of other aspects. I don't know what time it is, but it's time. I ran through this, but you probably have a lot of questions. You probably, you know, hate us now because we just make things a little more complicated, or we weren't clear at all. But if you have an extra minute, just if you want, I would really like you to write on that post-it that you have to your right, like a key learning from the workshop today. If you don't want to, it's fine. You can just leave the room. And I'll see you.
I'm gonna let some air in. There's coffee in this coffee break. Let's take a chance.